All right, Zig coming in on the top. Today on the show, we have singer-songwriter Eric Earley of the band Blitzen Trapper. Blitzen Trapper is an Oregon-based band. Their genre is very kind of hard to describe, but it's like experimental country, folk, rock. It's all over the place. It's really cool stuff, and all the songs are extremely well written. Eric is a very talented writer with a large body of work. Blitzen Trapper are playing in Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio, at the Grog Shop November 4th, 8 p.m. So if you are in Ohio or near Ohio, the place to see Blitzen Trapper is the Grog Shop, and that is November 4th. Blitzen Trapper also has a new album out. It's called Hundreds of Thousands of Millions of Billions. It's available on all streaming platforms. We're going to listen to a tune off it. This is Time to Fight by Blitzen Trapper. Blitzen Trapper is the band. Hundreds of Thousands of Millions of Billions is the record. It's available on all streaming platforms. Yeah, this was a fun conversation. I caught Eric as he was getting out of work, and the reception was kind of choppy. I did my best to edit it and make it seem like there was no problems with it, but then because of that, there's a couple points where there's kind of a gap in through line of conversation. But it's relative to what's said before. It was too choppy. Some of the parts were too choppy to keep in there. But yeah, it was funny. Like, if you've listened to this podcast before, I used to do all these at the gig, before the gig, a lot of times out of the van. And this day in particular, I almost had to do it leaving a gig in the van. And I hop on the call, and he's calling me from his van. So it was almost the first time where it was a double van interview, first in the history of Zig at the Gig. But it did not cut out to be that. I was able to get home and be at the desk. Anyway, this conversation goes deep into Buddhism of all places, which was really fascinating. I've left with some lessons out of this one. Anywho, I hope you guys dig this conversation. Lastly, before we get to the interview, if you can like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool guests like Eric and sharing their insight with you. And if you're in Ohio, you can see Blitzen Trapper live at the Grog Shop November 4th at 8 p.m. Anywho, here we go. Here's the conversation. So to jump into it, can you tell me about the banjo your uncle built for your dad?
Yeah, I still have that banjo. Yeah, it's sort of a relic in the family. My Uncle Jay made it. He was like a woodworker guy. And he was best friends with my dad. And yeah, he built the banjo just for fun. And I've used it on a lot of recordings over the years.
Is it like a 5-string, 4-string?
Yeah, it's just a typical 5-string type deal. It's not the greatest band. Oh yeah, I'm not sure what he used for the drum on that thing, but it just sounds really great. Kind of a weird old antiquated instrument.
Your Uncle Jay, so was music in the family with your dad and your uncle, or was that just something he did to build something?
Well, my Uncle Jay was not a musician. He was married to my dad's sister, so he wasn't like a blood relation. But yeah, my dad and his brothers all played music and stuff. Yeah.
In the sense of just like hanging out and playing, or were they writing songs as well?
No, they were mostly just hanging out and playing, and they all played guitars. They'd have guitar parties, and this is in the 60s, so like 70s, 60s. But yeah, they could all play instruments, and my granddad was like a harmonica virtuoso. He was amazing. I have recordings of him.
Yeah,
but he only ever did it just for fun,
Having like a banjo like around, is that what you started on?
Yeah, I started playing just on that because the neck's smaller. So I started playing that when I was probably around 5 years old, and then I got into guitar a couple years after that because we had guitars sitting around all the time.
And did it come to you naturally, or was dad or uncle or someone showing you chords?
Oh yeah, my dad would show me stuff on it, and it's from such a young age that I guess I always played, so I don't really remember not playing. It's kind of weird, actually.
Like just to be that kind of immersed by it and be like it's always there as an option,
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like I was a much better guitar player when I was like a teenager and in my 20s and stuff. because I was just playing all the time, and I don't play as much as I used to.
Yeah.
But and I'll hear recordings of myself from those times, and I'm like, man, I was really deep in it. I like studied classical at one point and all that.
Was that through school or was that just on your own accord?
I studied it with this pretty renowned, at least in Oregon, guitarist John Doan. He was famous for popularizing the harp guitar, which is this crazy old medieval instrument. Yeah. So I studied with him for a while. He was really cool. That was fun.
Was it like an intense dude, like posture? You put your hand here, like, or was it more relaxed?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, he was chill. He was actually pretty chill. He was like a really sweet guy. But yeah, it was definitely more technical. And this was when I was older. I was probably in my early 20s when I started doing that a little bit. So it was more about learning to read music. I already had a lot of skills. So it was more just about like learning to read music and like learning all the tricks and stuff of like medieval classical styles,
Yeah, like that, like Baroque, that kind of fourth and fifth sounding like atmosphere, that type of, totally. Which is super guitar, super string based, which it's so appealing to like anyone who plays strings.
Yeah, and I studied a lot of lute music actually with him. Now that I'm thinking about it, and which is 5-string.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. That was cool. I forgot about all that stuff.
It's tuned weird too. Lutes are strange. Like my buddy has one, and
it can be. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow, that's cool. Like, so to come in like with this like kind of appreciation for like just music around, and then dive into like this kind of like hardcore in a way, like very focused approach to like stringed instruments.
Yeah, definitely.
At that time, so I read that you dropped out of school to pursue music.
Yeah, I did. I dropped out of college. Yeah.
Okay. So it was that kind of during that transition there, because wanting to read music as a guitar player to me sounds like someone who's like, okay, I really got to get those type of gigs to make some cash.
Well, I wasn't really thinking about gigs or anything like that. I just kind of was having a good time playing. Yeah, I never really saw music as like a career until I was in my like mid to late 20s. I started trying to get serious about it. Yeah.
Well, that makes sense. Like, you know what I mean? Just kind of like when it's just a passion and you're not worried, it's better when it's that way. So
I mean, yeah, that definitely was. Yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry. So when you're studying this, I find that super fascinating, because like guitar playing is kind of like this weird realm where like sheet music doesn't really like, it's a little abstract in a way, because you have a bunch of notes you can start from initially, and like you really have to kind of putz your way through the piece, then get the fingering right, which I'm sure is with classical music, I'm sure it's kind of like written out, like where the fingering and everything goes. So I'm guessing that approach is different than like jazz, which is what I ended up studying.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So that like as a guitar player, I was always like, I felt like I was in elementary school when I went to college for music. I was like, hold on, this is a paragraph. I need to read it slowly.
Right. Totally.
But okay, so at that, when you like decided to like pursue it full time, like were you were writing songs?
Yeah, I mean, I've always written songs since I was a kid. Yeah, and played in bands in high school and stuff. But I don't know, man. In my 20s, I was kind of just like a loose cannon. I wasn't really doing anything. I went to school for a long time, or not a long time. Oh yeah, I was always writing songs and stuff. And honestly, like the Blitzen Trapper was sort of a fluke. Like it just was an accident. Like I'd recorded some songs and stuff and put it on MySpace. Wow. And some A&R guy like just happened upon it, and like we got a record deal kind of like out of that. But I was never any good at like pursuing a career in music, and I've never really been good at like being a professional musician. I'm kind of just like always experimenting and doing weird stuff and kind of just following whatever I'm following, which has never been good for anyone's career, but it just sort of the way I've always been. So yeah, it wasn't like I was like, oh, this is my goal and I'm going to make this happen. It was just me putzing around and then stumbling into a record deal and then touring and,
Yeah. No, that's it's incredible because it's an incredibly hard thing. I think even when you're actively pursuing it to make it happen, but like the whole act of writing songs and creativity is the complete opposite of that. It's
Yeah.
supposed to be fluid and just kind of happen, and like it's an interesting realm where those two things kind of have to collide in a way. Um, and I got to imagine like kind of like growing up and like developing yourself in that kind of flow period when you guys kind of got picked up. Was there ever kind of like a clash of that kind of like flow with like,
Yeah, I think that's always been the clash for me. I'm just not like, I think the music business, especially now with social media, it's oriented towards the extrovert, and I've never been an extrovert. I'm just like, even back then I would prefer to just be in my little crappy studio, like just experimenting with sounds and music and all that. Um, and I think for me, it's always been the challenge is to like be a professional or something.
well, yeah, no, I totally relate to that whole, what's the word? Imposters kind of syndrome when you're like, you're doing this thing and you're like, I'm the person that answers these questions. Okay. B minor or like,
Yeah, yeah, totally.
one like, and it's interesting because to get ready to talk with you, I went through just about every record I can find. And Blitzen
It's a lot of
Trapper,
records, man.
it is. It's been like the last couple weeks. This is all all I've been hearing is you, and it's been pleasurable, man. I really enjoy your songwriting. I'm really inspired by how you approach how you approach songs sonically and like narratively, which is a word I'm making up, but
Yeah.
but it's really inspiring stuff. And I personally have been trying really hard to become a better writer, and chancing upon like your music has definitely been very inspiring. But one thing I found like really fascinating was from like the early beginnings of Blitzen Trapper, like tunes like the All Girl Team, and like a lot of songs on the first couple records have like this like white stripies kind of like edge to it. It's such an interesting blend of like this kind of folk and like rock approach. Can you tell me a little bit about like tunes like the All Girl Team and like kind of this early era of sonically experimentation?
Yeah, that's going way back. I mean, I think it's very much of the time. Like, there was a lot of just like guitar rock going on, and I was always a huge Steve Malcolm's Pavement fan, and so that sort of angular kind of experimental guitar rock was always in the DNA of the music. Um, but I grew up playing folk music, and so that has always come naturally. And so I think that early stuff is really just a blend of like sort of the stuff I grew up on mixed with the stuff that I was like really getting into at that time. Um, and also, I mean, I think for me, I've always liked to just dabble in whatever, all kinds of stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, that the first self-titled record is super weird. Like, it's not a great album, but there's definitely some songs where you're just like, what? Like, I think there's one song where I do like almost like a jazz piano solo, and like, there's just a bunch of weird stuff. It's just me sort of flailing around, enjoying myself, just messing around with different ideas, you know?
That's what I loved about it, though. It was like I can't figure out where this is going, but that's what makes it so cool.
Sure.
And like as someone who dives into music and listens to music a lot, that's what made it really like it had like this like song kind of structured pop sensibility, but it was also like all over the place.
Yeah.
So with it's so when you started with like folk tunes, you said, or playing folk music, was that like what were some of those artists like?
Well, I mean, I grew up just playing acoustic guitar and banjo. So,
Right.
you know, my dad was teaching me all kinds of just old folk music, Doc Watson and John Denver and Bob Dylan, and just the whole gamut of that kind of stuff. So that was kind of what I grew up learning to play. You know, like that was what I was using to learn how to play. You know, Cries of Seals and Nash, And then as I got older and started getting electric guitar, I got into like REM and replacements and like sort of just the more guitar rock, so what like proto alternative or whatever you'd even call it.
Interesting, because you guys eventually you tour with Pavement, right?
Yeah, we toured with Steve quite a bit, and not with Pavement, but with his solo project. Yeah.
So I guess like so it's a really so with knowing that about what the tunes and the artists you grew up playing makes a lot of sense with the kind of like projection of like this kind of mesh of all these different styles. Was it kind of like did it make sense that like because eventually like with albums like Furr, when you guys really get like kind of picked up in a different way, um did it feel like that made sense why like that kind of approach to a tune? Because I think I've read or I listened to you talk about writing that tune and how it just kind of happened, um, with kind of having this kind of like experimental background in like these like growing up with folk music to have a tune that kind of like an album that kind of had a little bit more of that. Did that make sense, I guess, to you as a writer, why that kind of like worked?
Yeah, I think with that record with Fur, I started to harken back to the stuff I grew up on, what I grew up playing and listening to as a kid. And so I think starting with that record, yeah, that was the first record where I started to kind of like write folk songs again. Um, and yeah, I think it makes sense that that would be sort of our taking off point, our trajectory really started with that record. And it really, I think that record was always really very true to every element of the stuff that I was, listened to throughout my whole life, because that record covers everything from folk music to like really heavy rock music.
What with that tune in particular too, I've listened to that a bunch, and I kind of hear like a Dylan cadence in a sense in like the verses,
Sure.
which like I mean I think with all like that type of music, it's inescapable to kind of like not have some type of thread of inspiration or trailed a thread to something that came before, and like when it comes to like writing tunes. And I guess I know everyone's got like a completely different approach, and like every song's completely different. Um, but with like a tune that comes out more like that, do you find yourself, are you a person who writes it all together, music and lyric, or is it kind of like lyric and then the music happen in post?
They all kind of happen together. Uh, that song for definitely happened all together at once in a very short evening. Um, yeah, that's kind of how I prefer to write, is all at once.
Because you also write novels, and like that, I gotta imagine is a completely different approach, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, writing stories is different than writing story songs. The story song is more like a puzzle that you put together. Um, yeah, writing like stories and books and stuff, that's like a whole other deal.
Is I guess is part of the puzzle the minimal amount of time you have to kind of share the narrative, or is it or
Yeah,
yeah?
yeah, and the reason I say puzzle is that the pieces of a puzzle all fit together in this very like exacting kind of way. And so to me, the key, like the trick with songs is songs, you want the lyrics, the cadence, the music, the rhymes, and the arrangement to all fit together like a puzzle. You know what I mean? You want all those elements to fit together to create an atmosphere. And so like atmosphere is always what I've really been interested in with songs, and not just like atmospheric music, but like an atmosphere like you get with like really good movies. You know what I mean? So like for me, like a song like Black River Killer creates this atmosphere that's almost cinematic, like it's multidimensional. And that's always what I'm kind of going for with songs.
I think that's really well said, because like even just like the type of language and the word choice you choose to use can set the atmosphere for the character and the narrative, and to like sonically what accompanies that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Then with writing like a novel, is that more of like a practice then for you, or is it kind of like a outcome of like just writing in general?
Yeah, I think it's always been a way for me to, well, let me just say that like the novels that I've finished in my life, they're always novels where I'm exploring through narrative, semi-fictional narrative, my past, where I grew up. And that's kind of why I'm doing it, is like sort of an exploration. Like I've never like tried to get anything published or anything. It's always been more just an exercise, but a very long exercise over years and years.
It almost seems like kind of a is this like a more therapeutic approach to your past, or is this just like, oh, because that's a
Yeah, I
really
think
interesting.
so.
Yeah.
I think so. I haven't worked on novels for quite some time, a few years, you know. But I have a Substack that I'm writing now, and I've incorporated pieces of some of the books in there. Um, and a lot of it is just stories about the songs, but also stories about my life and and the people around me.
To write about just your past or people around you is like envelop it causes one to put like a lot of thought and emotion into a person or a thing, and like it's not an easy practice. Writing is a very, like, as far as like the brain chemistry, it takes up it's running a lot. So it's not an easy thing to just want to do for somebody. Did this kind of practice come from somewhere? Were you inspired by something?
No, I've just always been a completely obsessive person throughout my life with creating,
Yeah.
and in particular creating narrative. So yeah, I mean, I've always written since I was a little kid, and from the first time that I could write or start reading books, I just wanted to like copy it, just like write my own books, write my own songs and all that. So, and I think it turned into, I think it was an obsession, and it's always been an obsession of mine for some reason. And I've tried to dismantle those parts of me that, and like understand why I've had that obsession. Um, and I really don't know why. It might come from a previous incarnation. I really don't know. But like when I say obsessed, I mean like I've written 3 novels all over hundreds of thousands of words. You know what I mean? Like I've just written a lot, and I've written probably all the records you've heard. I've probably written twice that many records. Probably recorded most of that material. So like, and I think the obsession has not entirely been healthy for me throughout my life. But like I've just the amount of content I've churned out over the last 30 years um, is definitely, it borders on obsession for sure.
The amount of like output you have is very, very impressive. Just with Blitzen Trapper, the amount of records to listen to, they get ready to talk with you, and like in knowing that you've written novels, and knowing as someone who kind of works on songs in their own right, the whole thing is like there's a million songs before you hear the one you hear right now, or like there's 10 takes before you heard that one.
Right.
So like it's super impressive, and it definitely is like an admirable obsession. But I also find it very interesting that you also point out that it can be, or at times maybe has been, like detrimental.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think in my life, I've had like a kind of, like, I don't think there's been a lack of awareness, I think, of the obsession that I've had with content creation. And I think that it's definitely, hurt different aspects of my life. And, and I think in the last 6 to 8 years, I've attempted to sort of remedy a lot of these issues. And so as a result, my content production is nothing like it was. Like I don't really write songs that much anymore, to be honest. I just don't. And I've focused on other things. but at the same time, I've started to really enjoy the live performance aspect way more than I ever have in my entire life.
Is it kind of stepping out of that cycle of write, record, tour, write, record, tour?
I think so. I think it's more stepping out of like head down, blinders on, create, and more into enjoying and being aware of the actual experiences I'm having at that moment. Because songwriting is so much about going into the past or going into a fantasy or a mind palace that you can really lose touch with what's happening right here, right now. And so as I've sort of developed my Buddhist practice over the last 6 years, I've really focused on trying to be here now and be aware of what and mindful of what's going on all the time. And it's totally changed the way that I look at live music. It's just so much funner because when you're playing music live on a stage, it's all about the moment. It's like being in that moment. And I just find that I'm really getting better at entering into the present moment and playing the music as opposed to cooking it up in a studio and like perfecting it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it makes me think of that adage, work to live or live to work in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So with like kind of finding this Buddhist practice, like, did that look like going to a temple? Did that look like looking up stuff on your own? How'd that start for you?
Well, my path was sort of twofold. Like I started getting into the sort of, I got into the Tibetan Book of the Dead sort of by accident and just curiosity. As a small kid in my like tweens, I guess you'd say, I was always attracted to like hanging around in the old bookstores in Salem, Oregon. I was always attracted to the Eastern religion and mysticism section, and I couldn't tell you why, to be honest. And as I got older, I kind of forgot about it. But then later on in life, I've kind of gone back in, and then I went to therapy for quite some time, and a therapist that I had basically was using, I didn't know it, but he was using Buddhist psychology with me, and it really made a lot of differences just in my daily life. And then after the fact, I started to realize like, oh wait, this is all based in really old Buddhist teachings. And so I started to go directly to the source, reading the sutras, listening to Dharma talks by various people. And then it started to kind of all click together. Yeah, so that was kind of the twofold trajectory that I had.
That's fascinating. So like a Buddhist like kind of like approach to therapy, like what did that like I don't, not to like pry, but like was that like using the sutra in like a way that isn't just like read from the script, like, or is that kind of applying like a kind of a Buddhist idea to whatever you guys were talking about?
Well, what I've come to realize is that the majority of modern Western psychology, it was actually done first by the Buddhist practitioners of 2,000 years ago. Well, over 2,000 years ago. And I think Carl Jung kind of realized that, but didn't have the translations at hand to really understand the entirety of it. But I think anytime you go to therapy now, so much of it now is based on the ideas around the unconscious, subconscious, self-awareness, mindfulness, all these things. Those are all concepts that originate in Buddhism.
Yeah, you know, that's fascinating because like even just like with like yoga, you know what I mean? Like it's everywhere.
Yeah, sure.
And like, but I mean, like I'm just trying to.
That predates Buddhism, but it plays into it, and in fact, it is another way that I sort of got into it because I started doing yoga quite some time ago, and just the practice of getting into your body and becoming aware of your body, that is a very Buddhist practice. That's kind of the foundation of mindfulness is getting into the body and being aware of each cell of your body, basically.
To kind of step away and really like, because I as someone who's like kind of studied psychology, because I went to school for music therapy, and like thinking about all the Carl Jung and the Freud like aspects of stuff, it's interesting that no one kind of like pointed out the through line to like how these come from a Buddhist, like, because it does, that makes sense that like so kind of like getting this insight from therapy and diving into it, and I think like just even having a practice of anything, right, kind of restructures
Yeah.
how the mind reacts to certain things. Like for myself, I know if I don't do my routine of like practicing and in writing and in workout routine, I don't feel good. Like there's something in my brain that's like, you need to
Yeah.
do this thing. So like kind of diving into this, did you find like your routine and your like, I guess your neural pathways switching?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like a different person than I was a decade ago, but in a really more profound way than I've ever felt. Um, and I think a lot of what has happened with my music career in the past few years, and a lot of my output has gotten lower. But I think a lot of it is me sort of like starting to sort of know myself for the first time and be able to look at my identity from the outside, you know, and
Yeah.
kind of be able to start to be like, oh wait, I don't have to be like that, or I don't have to do that, or that's not me, you know. So in a way, yeah, it's kind of been an awakening process to my own self, and I think that's how it is for most. That's how it's for everybody, you know. But yeah, as far as the discipline the practice that I have, yeah, it's similar to what you said. Like, get up in the morning and I do Tibetan body practice. I do some mantra, some meditation, and I do it at night too. And if I don't do it, yeah, I feel like, oh, I need that centering, you know. And it feels really good to have something like that that's deep and that's ancient, you know.
Wow, I mean that's a really beautiful outcome from all this to like kind of take it away, cuz like thinking about just like the kind of like ebb and flow and the like endless hustle of just like how music and it is how that any entertainment career is like, and for someone that who's like constantly wanting to create, to kind of maybe have that like anxiety if you don't create, the next tour won't happen. I don't know if that's something you've experienced,
Yeah,
but just like the kind of thought of that would be like put that in a whole different spot.
yeah, definitely. Put it in perspective. Yeah,
Yeah, and I don't know. I think like the kind of being able to wait and like put a lot into one thing as opposed to maybe not as much as before, definitely adds more weight to it emotionally, the emotional output of it, because like hundreds of thousands, this new record is incredible.
oh, I appreciate that.
Did you find writing this with like kind of more time taken away from that kind of like focus on the hustle of it was a similar experience for yourself?
Yeah, yeah, I think yeah, with the new record, it definitely was stepping back and kind of like not worrying about completion and not really worrying about, well, anything. I was just kind of trying to create like I did when I was 18 and 19, you know, with no real prospects or like pressures or anything like that. It was just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna make some music and record with my buddy, and you know, and I think that's part of why I did go back and sort of look through some of my old 4-track recordings and kind of pull stuff from there, because I wanted to like return to that era when I was 18 and 19, just writing songs and making recordings just for myself, not really for anything else. Um, yeah,
In a way, that's kind of like your music step into your own body, like how you described with the Buddhist practice.
yeah, absolutely.
Wow, that's pretty deep, man. Like, I guess it is like that's in, like because I
Yeah,
was
yeah.
talking with another cat here about listening to old tapes and like kind of how they're torture tapes. Like,
Oh,
you know what I mean? You listen back, and you're like, oh gosh, I'm glad I put time in and can hit notes a little better. You know what I mean? Or I'm glad I can hold this down, or got a
yeah.
better whatever. I gotta imagine some of that crept in with like diving into these old tapes.
Yeah. I mean, a little bit. I mean, there's a part of me that realizes that like a lot of the music that I was creating at 18 and 19 was like, I don't know, it's almost better than some of the stuff I did later because it was more pure and more kind of like true to the essence of more true to the essence of like where it was all coming from. You know what I mean? Like it all comes from inside. But like at that point, I was like really deep in my mind palace, and so I don't know. I think I like a lot of it. I mean, a lot of it's just really weird and experimental and nerdy, but like it's cool to like step back into it and just be like, oh yeah, that's where my head was. And yeah, I don't know. It's weird, man.
I love it. I love that, like, because I guess, because part of being able to move on with any point of, I feel like singing in any fashion is to be able to listen to what you just produced and be like, maybe I don't like all that, but I like how I hit that line. I can work with that. It's the kind of like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, I love that you can look back and just kind of jump into the creative essence of yourself from 19 or 20 or whatever, however far back those tapes are going.
Yeah.
Like that's really inspiring to be able to look back at that guy and be like, I dig what you're doing.
You're right.
So another thing, I guess, also kind of like that, with this kind of like, I guess Buddhist not enlightenment, but like, practice that you have, like with the job you're doing now, like that's a very much of service job, like all the time. That's a tough gig. Do you find like doing something like that kind of also helps serve in that practice for yourself?
Uh, yeah, I think so. I mean, I've been doing this for about 6 years now, and my motivations have definitely evolved over the years, and my ideas about serving others and the ways in which we attempt to serve others has evolved over the years as well. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think my practice has definitely made it a little easier for me to do this work for sure. Made it easier to sort of detach in certain ways in a healthy way, I guess.
Right.
And avoid burnout,
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. No, I totally relate to that because it's like all these
yeah,
problems a lot of them you can't fix at all. You can only like be in that moment
yeah,
with whatever's going on. Right. And like,
yeah, exactly.
I relate to that with the student, and you relate to that with like, you work with homeless veterans, right?
No, I just work with homeless people in general
Okay.
now.
Okay.
I started out with a veterans only group, but then a few years after that, me and a couple folks splintered off and started our own nonprofit. And so, yeah, we serve just the general population.
That's amazing. Like, and that's a lot of work too. Oh my God. Starting your own and then serving that population is a relentless effort. But like, I can see like
Yeah.
how being able to like healthily put boundaries and like accept one's choices are their own choices. I can see how that would be very beneficial in in that run of work.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Most definitely. Yeah. And I think there's this element of tragedy and comedy that sort of coalesce with this kind of work, which is a strange thing to say, but I think being able to sort of find levity in the midst of all the really messed up stuff that goes on is kind of like where I began to sort of mix my practice in, yeah, and with this work.
It's interesting. I feel like any like with comedy or with like I don't want to say comedy, but any like point of like laughter or being kind of silly with a thing kind of opens up the gateway for a sense of comfort. Like
Yeah, for sure.
like someone who's able to like maybe someone won't sing a song seriously their first time ever, but they'll come out and they'll do a silly song and find that they can hold a tune. You're like there's this interesting thing with like laughter which makes this sense of comfort in a way.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
Um I guess kind of okay. This is a spin I did not mean to do, but with that, you guys did that that thing on I'm forgetting the Trapper Massacre on
Oh
Funny or
yeah, with
Die.
Rain. Yeah, yeah.
How'd that come about?
Rain Wilson was just a fan, and he reached out, and wanted to hang out at an LA show. Um, and yeah, he brought his crew, and we just hung out and filmed this thing. Yeah, it was super fun. That was many years ago.
It was really I dug it. Me and my band, we do a lot of goofy videos, so that was like kind of right up our
Yeah.
alley. Like I can get into this.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I guess as far as like, because I also read, or maybe I heard it, that you're like a very avid reader, and like you'll often read 3 books at a time in different genres.
Yeah, that's generally how I like to roll.
Yeah.
Just yeah, just to get like all kinds of ideas going at once. Right now I'm only reading oh no, I'm reading 3 right now, yeah.
What are you cracked into now?
I'm reading a really good book by Jack Kornfield, who is a Buddhist psychologist. And then I'm also reading a really good book by Montauk Chia, who is this Taoist practitioner who brought Taoist tantric sexual practices into the West. And so I've been getting really deeply into the Taoist inner alchemy sexual practice.
Yeah.
And then I'm also reading Weisenberg. Have you ever read him? Aaron Weisenberg? Yeah, he's a journalist who writes, he's kind of like recreated journalism into this weird prose thing. But he wrote this book called Elemental Things or something like that. So I've been reading that one. So strange. It's nonfiction, but it reads like the weirdest fiction.
That sounds. I mean, those are. I love it, man. Like to be able to take in it. Like it's. What's the word I'm looking for? It's like the Strummer like theory. You got to take in the put out with like anything like creatively and like you know. Well, you know what I mean. You got to live life to have something to say about it, and like
that's right, man.
and like it's something that like when you're kind of doing one thing and you running like when you're working all day or trying to do one thing all day, I think a lot of times people often forget to do, and it can be kind of like, you know, challenging to like even think you can do that. So when I read that about you and after diving into your music, I'm like, it only made your work more inspiring. With this latest record, is there any reading aside from the sutras that kind of fed into some of the work?
I'm sure there is. It's hard for me to tell because so much of the way that I write is just so flow state that like I'm not like, oh, I'm gonna put this from this thing in there. You know, when I'm writing, it really is just flow state. Like with this record, I really was, and I would write immediately after doing like a long meditation session in order to sort of like harness the, you know, the dream yoga energy or whatever the hell it is. Yeah, it was more kind of just a flow state record, in my opinion.
Wow. Okay, so like after a session, it'd be kind of like would it pick up a guitar and just start kind of like put on the recorder, or would it be like writing down like on paper?
Yeah, I would write it down.
Okay.
Yeah, I was writing stuff down, lyrics and stuff. I found that a lot of the imagery, like quite a few of the songs have a lot to do with reincarnation and rebirth, which I hadn't really planned, but I think when I was writing that record, my ideas about rebirth, reincarnation and stuff were starting to sort of shift. And so I think a lot of that made it into some of the songs. But a lot of that is due to me being really deeply, like reading a lot of sutras for the first time at that point when I was writing those songs. And so it was kind of opening my mind up to all the sort of spectrum idea of Buddhism, which is that there's a spectrum of different types of beings. There's a spectrum of consciousness. There's a spectrum of realms. Like there's not just like demons and angels or heaven and hell. You know, there's not duality in Buddhism, which is what I love about it. There's sort of a spectrum to everything. and the reincarnation idea is a part of that, because reincarnation is a spectrum of types of rebirth, you know, like there's the six wombs and like all these sort of ideas that are not black and white, but that are sort of spectrum in nature. I think a lot of those ideas is what I was into when I was writing the record.
That it is the ambiguity of just like life. It's interesting how people want to kind of shoe it into like a or B or a black or white or a yin or yang, or just kind of like, even though yin and yang kind of flows in, that's a bad example. That scratch that one. That one I take out. But you know what I mean? It's interesting how people try to kind of hustle stuff into one side or the other for that immediate comfort. And I guess it's to accept that kind of like ambiguity or like that lack thereof, A or B, the comfort of uncomfortness. Like, I think that's a thing that takes a long time to kind of like accept or just like kind of comprehend in a way. Is that something that like for you came out of like some of these practices?
Yeah. I mean, I think that comfort really stems from like grasping. Like we grasp at comfort. That's what Americans do. You know, we're always trying to grasp at the next thing that'll make our lives easier or whatever. And I think that the problem is the grasping. Like the comfort's okay, but the grasping after it is what causes problems. And I think that, yeah, for me, it's been kind of revolutionary to realize like, oh, I don't have to hang on to any of this. I'm okay letting go of all of this, you know? think I think I was never really at a point in my life where I could until recently.
Well, that's incredible. I'm glad you're at this point where you can, because I feel like also as someone who's doing music, maybe you experience that kind of like that hustle to always keep going, to kind of maybe that grasping that to keep that flow state, or not that flow state, that like that I gotta just as I'll speak for me. I'm someone who always wanted to tour like and do more of the road work that like when I read about you guys, like you guys have done, and like, but maybe it's that always grasping at that makes it one of those things that's maybe unreachable, but also like the negative connotations for not having done something like that. Where, you know, does that make, I guess I'm losing my train of thought with like trying to express this in a question, but like with
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, the truth is though is that like no matter how much you tour or achieve, it'll never be enough. You know, I mean, you'll always want more. Even like Bruce Springsteen had a decade where no one knew who he was. You know what I mean? Like the '90s,
yeah,
and then like like no matter who you are, how big you've gotten, or where you've gotten to, there's always going to be something to grasp for. And so I think the people that have cracked the code are the people that stop grasping. you know.
yeah, wow, man,
And maybe in this lifetime you don't get to tour, but in the next maybe you do. You know what I mean? Like there's always there's always going to be your consciousness, and it's going to keep changing and evolving and doing these different things, and maybe it'll keep grasping, but maybe at a certain point you'll start to sort of see that that's what's happening. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
everybody is just going through these cycles, and with each cycle things change, you know. But I understand what you mean. Like I definitely have felt that, and I've achieved a lot. I've written a lot of songs and done a lot of tours and stuff, but I still feel that like desire for more, you know. Kind of crazy.
Well, that's like, oh, man, I like, you're good at this, man. You're good at this. Like, and so well, that's just the wisdom and the practice of yourself, like kind of like exploration and like analyzation, like coming through and like, but and that just makes you, in my case, more of an inspiring figure. Like that's because you know what I mean, like because like to be able to accomplish what you guys did and be okay with like doing what you're doing now, you know, but also acknowledge like you're still reaching it. I think that's a big deal. Like that's really inspiring, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is just
It's
being
cool stuff,
like,
man.
but uh, I guess one more thing. Eric, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your
Oh
work.
yeah.
I appreciate your wisdom and you taking time to chat with me. You guys are playing at the Grog Shop on November 4th. Have any like Cleveland stories from past tours or past gigs at the Grog Shop that you can recall?
I mean, I've played. Yeah, honestly, I remember playing the Grog Shop with Stephen Malcolmus. Like we were
Yeah.
opening for him when we played there. Yeah, it's like a small place, but like there's been some epic shows there over the years. I probably played there like 5 times or 6 times. I don't know, maybe more. I don't know. Over the years, and it's always been grimy, but kind of epic. You know, it's just one
Yeah.
of those weird spots that you gotta love. You know.
Yeah, grimy but epic is I think key description to that venue, because it's like the stage is like maybe like a 2 feet higher than everybody, but like
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like,
that's right.
you
I
know?
haven't been there for a long time. Honestly.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to see you guys on the 4th.
Yeah, right on. That'll be fun.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig of the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.